Hello, what's up, everybody? Let's see, we got some people in the chat. I see Vishali, Sammy. Who else is here? Tanya, Polly, Sydney, Sammy, Tim, Lauren, Joe Tennis. What's up, guys? Welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here on time, or I guess a minute early. We're going to get started in just a little bit. Cool. So I got one more question while we're just waiting another minute for people to join in and say what's up in the chat. Have you ever done continuous discovery interviews? So our topic today, getting closer to our users, how to build a continuous interview habit and practice, and a consistent practice of kind of these lightweight conversations with users, these continuous conversations with your users and customers. That's what we're going to spend the next hour talking about. But I want to know if you personally have ever done this. Now, I have done in quotation marks because I don't necessarily need to know if you have, or mean that you've actually facilitated the interviews and been like the number one person running these interviews. Have you been a part of these? Have you done these in your organization? Definitely, if you've done them personally and conducted continuous interviews, share that in the chat. But I just kind of want to get a sense of everyone's experience level with this, because I know we have all different backgrounds, experience levels, different companies, products that you guys are coming from working on. And that out of all the research methods out there, this is one that gets a little less shine and attention, at least in my experience. So I want to see if that's the same for you guys. So let me know, have you been a part of a continuous discovery interview initiative? We'll put it that way. Not quite. No, did some interviews at the start of my research, but mostly other kinds of research since then. Tim, nope, never done it yet. A little bit hard to get users to meet. Sydney said we've had cohorts of users we met with once a week, but it was more of an open forum as opposed to continuous structured interviews. Interesting. Let's see. Joe, we have semi-longitudinal series testing, product evolution, new feature introduction, impact of redesign, rotating people, population, first time learning about this. Cool. So this is what I expected, but it's cool to see. Thanks for sharing some of those extra details. Joe, Sydney, Lauren, some of the challenges there. I wanted to take the temperature of what experience level you guys have with doing these. And just to relate it to my own experience, it's something I've done research and product design for a long time. And it's something that I have done. It is something that we do here at Lyssna. But over the close to 15 years I've been doing stuff like this, I've done it a few times, but to really think about when it's been a consistent, continuous practice like what we do at Lyssna and like what we're going to talk about today, it's been pretty rare in comparison to all of the other things like usability testing, which I've run millions of studies and worked on tons of different products that have done that. So it seems like we got a similar experience level with it here. But yeah, I wanted to take the temperature, but also get an idea so you guys can chime in with some questions, and definitely want to hear about some of your own experiences doing this, succeeding with it, failing with it, having it fizzle out, wherever that kind of happened along the way when you were doing these, or if you're doing them currently, to chime in with some of that stuff as we get into it. See, Bradley said, yes, we run an internal program where our designers meet with an in-market shopper at least once a month. Nice. And Grant said, what is it even? Got you, Grant. You are in the right place to learn what a continuous discovery interview practice is. I think that's a good cue. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joe. I'm going to be your guide on continuous discovery interviews, building a practice and a sustainable habit of talking to your customers. As I said in the chat, you guys have got some different experience levels with this. Some of you coming in curious about what it is and what we're talking about. Some of you, I'm sure, have some more experience with it and want to get some tips or maybe a framework and some process to improve on it, or maybe get it off the ground in your current organization. So we're going to cover all that. My goal as an instructor, guide, lead facilitator of this workshop is for you guys to leave here with some confidence, some real tangible skills, and I would also say some excitement to put this stuff into action. So I want everyone to have a good conceptual understanding and some new knowledge about continuous discovery interviews leaving this workshop. But more importantly than that, I want you guys to leave feeling ready and, let's say, jazzed up to maybe get an initiative off the ground with whatever you're working on and to do it well. All right, so let's start with like the kind of zoom out a little bit on talking to users. Here's a statement that I don't think is going to get a whole lot of pushback here. So we'll start out with a softball, right? Frequent, consistent communication with users is good. It's a good thing in general, right? Now we're going to talk about how to do it well and all the specifics of that. But in general, as researchers, as product people, having a pulse and staying in touch consistently with our users is a really good foundation to build great products, address their needs, and create successful products, user experiences, and businesses. Good in general, right? So I want to show you an example of that. These books I feel like I use my son, Henry. He's 4 years old. I use him as an example a lot to start our workshops, but I'm going to do it again here. And I'm going to talk about a really good product that we built together. These books he's obsessed with. I don't know if anyone here has little kids, but these books are basically just animals fighting each other. You'll learn about the animals, you get the tale of the tape, how big they are, how big their teeth are, and then at the end, it's like, what would happen if the killer whale met the great white shark? Anyway, Henry is obsessed with these books. We have 1,000 of them. And one rainy day, we decided to vibe code a game together. I showed him that you can build games. So we thought of a who would win game. As you can see here, it's pretty epic. You're picking your animals. Wait till we get to the fight scene. Let's see. Yeah, who wouldn't want to play this? Okay, so why am I showing this? This game that we built together and did a little daddy-son coding, vibe coding on Lovable, Henry's obsessed with this. He loves this game. If this was a product with a satisfaction score and engagement metrics, this one would be through the roof for my number one user. But the way that it got that way was through a lot of iteration and constant stream of feedback. As you can imagine, with a 4-year-old, I was getting feedback every single time he played this. He couldn't hit the button on his iPad. He wanted to add new animals. Why are the sharks fighting the killer whales in this, I don't know, AI-generated arena instead of the water? So going back to our original statement of consistent, frequent communication and feedback from users being a good thing, I would say this is the extreme level, right? Built a great product, a game that he absolutely loves. And that came through a whole lot of feedback, a stream of consciousness from a 4-year-old telling me all the stuff he wanted to do with it and how he was using it and what worked and what didn't. Made me proud, a proud father and a proud product designer. Why I'm showing this, though, it doesn't have to be this extreme. A 4-year-old telling you what to do and what updates to make to your app constantly is a pretty constant and pretty extreme example of that frequent feedback and conversations with your users. But you can get a lot of the same benefits in a, let's say, more realistic and maybe less extreme example of that. Here's one from a project that I worked on years ago that I also use as an example quite a bit. It was a test prep app for the GRE and GMAT. And it was something that I was working on as kind of the lead designer, researcher, working with a team who runs a tutoring program, like an in-person tutoring program for the GRE and GMAT, who wanted to build a web app, a digital component to help students study for it. So this was not the 4-year-old stream of consciousness, but it was a great example of light, frequent, consistent, and impactful feedback. We did do a lot of I was going to say real research, but a lot of more focused, targeted research, usability testing, all the methods we know and love when working on this app. But in addition to that, we had a little program club where students would stay after class for 15 to 20 minutes a few times a week. This was in person in Washington, D.C. at their classroom. And they would just talk to the tutors about how they were studying, how things were going, and also if they were using like a beta version of this, what they were doing with it, and just a check-in, right? How are things going? So this was quick, right? It was a few students staying for, like I said, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe once a week after, just volunteering to stay after and talk for a little bit one-on-one. It was mostly facilitated by the tutors, people who are helping them study for the GRE and GMAT. So not researchers, not product design people, tutors who are helping them talk about what to focus on, how to improve their test scores, and who have a great understanding of just the subject matter area of studying for one of these tests. And it was a light agenda, light sharing, and debriefing. So a lot of times I would get the notes from these meetings in a quick Fig Jam on a Slack channel that we had created, or if I was talking directly to some of the tutors, they would just share some of this with me verbally on a call. And in addition to a lot of the other research methods we used and stuff that we did to define and iterate and improve this product, these proved to be really impactful. We saw a lot of themes emerge, a lot of trends that led to product decisions. And I'll say personally, as someone who has never taken the GRE or GMAT and went into this project with not a whole lot of subject matter knowledge or expertise, it was super, super useful for me just to have my finger on the pulse of less about the product, more about the overall process and experience of studying for and taking this test. So again, not quite as extreme as 24/7 feedback from Henry on what animals we need to update the game with and what new attacks we need to add. A little lighter, but still frequent, consistent, impactful, and consistent, and something that really led to some good product decisions and some interesting trends and challenges that we ended up addressing. So coming back to our original statement, right? Frequent, consistent communication with users is good. It helps us discover pain points and opportunities as they come up. It helps us see some themes that emerge over time if we're doing this consistently. It helps us build a pool of users who feel invested because they're part of shaping the product. And research becomes an ongoing habit, something that is built into your process, not just something that you're saving for the big occasional study, you know, that big usability test of the new feature or the extensive interview initiative for a new onboarding process that you're creating. Those have their place too, right? That's not to totally replace those, but it has other benefits that some of those one-off, more specific, focused, larger research initiatives don't give you. You see, Sammy, can you share the animal fight app? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I will share it with you guys. Maybe if we take towards the end, I'll grab the link for it. Definitely. We'll add multiplayer mode. I'm not busy enough. Let's get some online who would win and I'll take animal suggestions. Okay, so all the good stuff about frequent communication with users, it's good, but it's also rare. And this kind of gets back to the question that I asked you guys as you were coming into the workshop. We know this is good, right? It's like talking to users frequently as researchers is a no-brainer. It's like the most fundamental aspect. If you had to break research down into its most pure form, it would be conversations with the people using your product, right? We all agree on that, but we also know it doesn't happen a whole lot, or it doesn't happen consistently. Those bigger one-off initiatives are happening all the time. Those are known often as things that are required or essential to building a good product. But these kind of continuous interviews take a back seat. And there are a bunch of reasons for that we'll discuss, but some of the big ones. Researchers are already strapped for resources to test for these specific high impact features and concepts. So I'm sure most of you have experienced this here as product designers or researchers, that it's kind of an uphill battle to get resources to test out the big stuff, right? To test out this new onboarding process, this new feature. You have to get that approved. You got to make your case for why it's important and why it needs to be tested. And those are big, almost, let's say, undebatably important things to test out. And so when you're already strapped for resources or needing to make sure that you're covering the most essential things to do research on, let's just talk to users regularly, right? That can be a hard sell to stakeholders. It can be an easy thing to deprioritize for more design, more output, or even research in more specific areas. Now, one of the other reasons that this is rare, and something we'll get into more detail on, is that while these continuous interviews, these kind of lightweight catch-ups with your users and customers, while they're not super resource intensive, while they don't require what a 2-month targeted interview plan would, they're not free in terms of time and resources, right? You still got to find people to talk to. You still have to put a rough plan together of what you're going to talk about. You still have to get on Zoom or Google Meet and deal with a no-show or someone who's rescheduling at the last minute. You still have to make time for it. So while one of the selling points of this is, hey, it's easy to get up and running. We just kind of have to talk to customers once a week for 20 minutes. It's not the hardest thing to get up and running, but there is some resources, time, dedicated aspects of it that need to happen to make it actually work effectively and consistently. Let me see what Joe's got in the chat here. Guerrilla testing tends spin up, run for half a dozen cycles. People lose interest, management drip support, other things come up. A week gets skipped, then to exactly right. And that happens even with really high impact, essential research initiatives. So that is even more magnified when it's something informal. It's something that doesn't have a direct purpose, right? We're not testing, should we launch feature A or B? There's not a huge decision tied to it. So if it's happening with those things, exactly as you described, Joe, this idea of kind of lightweight, frequent, semi-structured, as we'll get into, research kind of easily takes a backseat. And this is what it lands on a lot. We should be doing more of that. Or I think, Joe, you described the fizzle out pretty well, right? A week gets skipped, then 2, and then, oh yeah, whatever happened to that? Maybe that could be the other version of this. Okay, so we're going to look at what continuous interviews are, how to recruit the right people, what a good session looks like, and what questions to ask, how to make the whole thing smooth and low friction, how to do this consistently, and finally, how to share what you learn and what comes out in these interviews in a way that is fast, easy, effective, and actually impactful for your team. So all of those reasons of things that we just discussed that make it a huge benefit to be doing something like this and building a continuous interview practice. We're going to talk about those and also talk about how to get around some of the things that can make it fizzle out or delay it or never get off the ground or make it so much of a headache that you start it and eventually stop doing it. So not just what it's about, but how to put this into action, because it's something, no matter whatever product you're working on or whatever role you're in, you can actually start this right away. Okay, so let's start with high-level overview, continuous interviewing 101. I'm going to share this link in the chat. This link is a guide created by my teammate Diane on continuous interviewing, and it's the basis for this whole workshop here. So I'm going to cover some of the big points from it with some examples, But this guide, save it, bookmark it, come back to it. This is a really thorough deep dive into all the things we're going to cover here, including some of the specifics that we'll talk about now about what continuous interviewing is and what it looks like in a session. So, what are continuous interviews? If you haven't got the gist of it already, they're short, recurring conversations with users on a regular cadence. And as I mentioned before, that's different than a research project with a start and end date or a specific initiative, like interviews that are specifically focused on certain habits, use cases, personas, or things like that. They're short, they're frequent, they're consistent, and they're semi-structured conversations or interviews. Continuous interviews can be facilitated by just about anyone. Researchers, definitely. Designers, our designers here at Lyssna do a lot of continuous interviewing. Other people on the product team, or if you think of my test prep example, it could be a tutor, someone who's close to the customers, having daily or frequent contact with them and chatting with them after class. Now, it probably is going to make sense that if you're on the product team, a researcher, designer, someone in that area, that's probably going to be the majority of people doing this. But the key here is anyone can with the right structure. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for having these conversations and gaining some of the insights over time when it's not just one person with a certain expertise who's capable of doing it. Continuous interviews are relatively short, right? 20 to 30 minutes is the sweet spot for them. I would say anything under 20 minutes is a little too short. You start with a couple minutes of just getting to know each other, a couple questions, maybe a little small talk at the beginning. And even though you're not trying to cover a massive amount of topics or questions, that 20 minutes can get eaten up pretty quickly. So, anything last 15 minutes is a little short, 20 to 30 minutes. Anything longer than that, I think you kind of get into the territory of it being a little too overwhelming or something that you could save for your next interview. Since these are continuous, you don't have to get it out all in one go. And you might have some questions to follow up with or something to ask your next participant about. So they're brief, right? And then in terms of frequency, these can be anything from, I would say, weekly as a really realistic but high level of frequency, to quarterly, which I would say if you're doing one continuous interview quarterly, you're doing 4 a year, unless there are other team members who are doing it, I'd say that's probably a little low. It's better than nothing. If that's what you can get started with after today's workshop, do it. But I would say that's maybe a little too spaced out. At Lyssna, we do them every other week. Most product designers are doing them every other week. So as we'll talk about, you got to find your own sweet spot. Most importantly, what's realistic and what you can do consistently, but somewhere in that range. I would say shooting for monthly, if this is something you're thinking about doing after this workshop, is a great starting point. Okay, we covered those already. So let's build a continuous interview practice. We're going to use this as kind of a demo app, Reps. I did get that as Claude gave me that name for a suggested platform for personal trainers for their clients to book sessions, message clients, send workout plans, and recaps. So we're going to imagine that we are the research or product team for Reps, which I think is a pretty great name, and that we want to start this, right? We want to start conducting some regular, consistent, continuous interviews with our users. And specifically, we'll focus on talking to trainers, right? So we could have users who are personal training or physical therapy clients or actual trainers. For this one, just for our example here today, we'll say that we want to start having some regular conversations with trainers who are using our product. Okay, so let's start out with the study setup and the recruitment. And I'm going to go into Lyssna and show you guys how I would set this up if I were leading this initiative for reps. Before we do that, though, it's important to call out the number one reason why continuous interview efforts fizzle out. Anyone want to take a guess in the chat? You say you're going to do these every other week. You get a plan together. You get the okay from management to do it. And then 3 months later, we're not doing them anymore. What do you guys think? Or if you've done them and it has fizzled out, what was the reason in your own experience? In the chat. Unconvincing output. That is a reason. And one that I've experienced. Poor scheduling, not setting those things up in advance, other priorities get in the way, urgent projects come up. Yep, urgent. Yes, these are good ones. I would say these are right there in the top 5. But I will say from the work I've done at Lyssna and seeing these happen, and also just personally in some of the work, is the friction around recruitment. And this is related to all the ideas that you guys just put in the chat here. Diane, definitely yours of poor scheduling and not setting things up in advance. But pretty much the thing that really can start to eat up time, start to throw off the schedule, and start to turn this from a once a week thing that sounds like a good idea into something that is no longer happening anymore is everything leading up to the moment in this photo where you're actually talking to one of your customers, finding them, who and how to recruit, sourcing participants, where to actually find them, availability. Again, leading in with some of your stuff in the chat, right? That urgent projects come up and that Friday time slot you had saved now needs to go to something else. Back and forth, calendar invites, logistics, no-shows, misaligned expectations. Someone gets on the call and they're actually not a personal trainer, but they thought this was about something else. They can't talk about personal training. They've never heard of your app, but they can talk about the personal training sessions that they're doing with their personal trainer. Tech, video integration issues, right? These are all of those little kind of logistical things, in addition to finding participants that start to add up. When I said before that these interviews are lightweight and easy to get off the ground, but not free or not instant, these are some of the things that I'm talking about. And these are the things that without the right tools and the right process can become a headache, and most importantly, can make it unrealistic to do these consistently, right? If you have these questions coming up over and over again of needing to find out who to recruit, where to find them, making time on your calendar, who's going to do the interview, what happens if there's a no-show, is it recorded if they can only use Google Meet? These are the things that are going to make you start to say, maybe we should do these once a month or once a quarter until they probably aren't happening anymore. It becomes a ratio thing. Exactly, Joe. Invested output, same full-blown study, and the output is around 50%. Yeah, the effort starts to add up and it becomes a little harder to trust the process of these continuous interviews and the results and the output and decisions that they'll yield. So let me show you how to not have to deal with that. I'm going to pull up a study here, an interview study here that I created in Lyssna for our reps example. And I'm going to walk you through not every aspect of it, but I'll walk you through some of the big stuff and walk you through some of the specifics that eliminate some of those headaches and streamline a lot of this process. Okay, so what I have here is a setup. Yes, I'm going to show you how to make the effort much less. Now, this was something also, Joe, that our interview product was already really good at Lyssna. We just refreshed it and added a bunch of stuff in, a Google Meet integration. We made some just UX, UI, good UX, UI updates on it, and a few other, what was the other one? Some updates to the recording. So yes, something that will make it, that effort much less, and even some new stuff within the past couple of weeks. All right, so let's set it up. We want to run some continuous interviews with our reps trainers. We're creating an interview study here in Lyssna. First thing we're doing, study name, calling it the reps trainer check-in, and giving a little welcome message. Now, this might seem like just something you plug in or like boilerplate info here, but it's actually really useful. It gives them an expectation, if you're distributing this to trainers, of what you're going to talk about, sets the tone and the vibe for the conversation. It gives them a little context about what this session is going to look like, and kind of the open-ended nature of it is really a way to be in touch with them and check in with your customers. We can set the language, the duration, which I put for 30 minutes here, device, if it matters, and we've got our basics of our study here. Now, in terms of recruiting participants, we're going to get into recruiting and how to distribute your study. But in terms of finding the right people to talk to, we can set up a screener survey. You don't have to use this in an interview application, but you can. So if you wanted to, let's say, find participants who are currently training clients, either just getting started or have been doing it for the past 3 years and want to qualify them for the interview, you can do that, and you can disqualify anyone who's not currently training clients. So a screener, great way for any study to get your study or your interview in front of the right people, saves an extra tool and an extra back and forth process of screening out clients or screening out users for a study or continuous interview like this one. I also added this in here. This is the new feature I was trying to remember, which is a video screener. So in addition to a strict kind of logic-based screener question like this first one here, you can also ask your prospective participant to record a video. So you could give them a prompt like, tell us a little bit about your day-to-day as a personal trainer, how you work with clients and handle scheduling. And you can decide if you want to then schedule an interview with them or not. This is a really interesting feature, especially depending on some of the questions you ask, because you can you can learn more than you can from a simple multiple choice screener question, and also just get a feel for how they're sharing, articulating certain things, and make a decision if you want to include them for one of your interviews. So in terms of recruiting and finding the right people, lots of tools here to do that. For this one, hosts and availability. So this solves the problem or streamlines the problem of back and forth calendar invites, right? We can share our calendar. You can add team members. If you're doing continuous interviews, it's likely that more people on your team will be doing them. You can add them here, sync your calendars up, make available dates and times, basically have a single link that you're sharing that is going to reduce the need for, again, other scheduling apps, integrations, Zapier connections, or probably the worst of all, back and forth emails. Let me know when you're free for 20 minutes and we'll do it. And a chain this long, just trying to get 20 minutes on the calendar. Super, super effective and cutting down on that time and effort, especially if you have more than one person who's involved in either observing, participating, or conducting these interviews. For meeting links, I mentioned this, but we integrate with Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, Zoom. You can also add a custom link if there's something else you want to send them to. So cutting down on the logistics of what's the link? Can you send me the link? I can't find it. Is it in the calendar invite? Is it the Google Meet invite in the calendar? Is it the Google Meet link in the calendar invite, or is it the Zoom link in the description of it? That stuff adds time, frustration, and makes these lightweight interviews not so lightweight, not so easy to keep consistent. Tools like this make that a lot easier. I want to highlight this one too, which is the automated emails, invitations, confirmations, reminders. I could show you the preview of these, but you probably get the idea here. Automated reminders throughout the process as a way of reducing no-shows and making sure that if you're putting time aside to run these continuous interviews, that you're making the best possible effort and have the best possible tools to make sure that someone is actually going to show up and you'll be able to do it. As far as some other stuff here, recruiting participants. You can recruit for your interviews just like you can with any other Lyssna study. So if you have a pool, let's say, of participants that you want to invite, you can create a link and share it with them. If you have a community for your product, if you want to put this on LinkedIn, anywhere you can share a link, you can recruit people for your interview. If you don't have that, you can also recruit from the Lyssna panel, just like a regular study. And you can use a lot of these filters here. I got to fix my wallet here to target those participants and find personal trainers within a certain area or people who are using a certain app. Combining the filters for panel recruitment with your screener survey, you might not be able to find users of your product, although you could. But if you don't have that user base or you don't have those segments to send it out to manually or to invite people to manually, you can find people at least within your target audience. So 2 really easy ways to recruit and get them out there. Now, after this, I'll just go quickly through it. You're going to see your applicants here. If people are applying and say, yes, I want to participate in this interview, you'll be able to handpick who you want to schedule an interview with and kick off that really streamlined flow of scheduling, reminders, and following up. Sessions are going to live here where you'll see the recordings and transcripts from each one and the information from each participant. Sessions here will show what sessions you have upcoming and which ones you've done. And then our recordings here where you'll see the actual recordings and transcripts from each one. So I mainly wanted to focus on the setup recruitment stuff because that's where a lot of the friction comes in and where a lot of these well-intentioned, consistent interview initiatives get derailed. But even beyond that, with this Lyssna setup, you're having everything in one place here for yourself if you're conducting them or for your teammates to really drastically cut down on the time and pain in the butt factor of getting to these interviews where you're actually finally one-on-one talking to a participant. Okay, so I can share that template with you guys as well, or share. I didn't put that in the resources, but I can if you want to see a little walkthrough of how I set that up. Okay, so that is setting up your study. And I spent the most time on that because that's really where a lot of the friction comes in and where a lot of the consistency gets broken. But I do want to talk about 2 other things, which are the actual interview and the questions and what you're talking about in those 20 to 30 minutes. And finally, how to share this with your team, the output of these interviews, how to share it in a way that is impactful, that sticks, and that can actually lead to some good product decisions rather than being buried in a hidden Google Drive folder, never to be seen again. Let's start with interview questions though. What do we talk about? So you set up your recruitment in Lyssna, you get some participants, finally your one-on-one on Google Meet or Zoom with one of your users. What do you talk about? So in a continuous discovery interview practice, you don't need a strict formal discussion guide for every session. You're not getting quite as detailed as you would for a more typical in-depth user interview. You want to have something though. You want to have a little reference and guidance of what to talk about and cover a few key parts of the interview and have something that you can reference just to keep the conversation going, or maybe to change directions if the participant doesn't have too much to share about a certain area. So it kind of keeps things semi-structured. And as the interviewer, it gives you options. You can find some other topics to talk about and have a little cheat sheet next to you. And I think it also gives you, at least for me, confidence, right? I have this sheet. I don't have to freestyle this, even though it's a relatively loose conversation. I don't have to be thinking on my feet for the next topic. I can pay attention. I can listen to what they're talking about. I can ask good follow-up questions. And I have my little guide here That's going to help me give me some options of things to talk about after. That's helpful for me in continuous interviews. If someone else on your team is doing these who's not a researcher or does not have experience with conducting interviews, that's going to be really helpful for them as well. So let me share this with you guys. This is the template that I have screenshotted here. And you can duplicate this. Diane also created this one, and it covers a lot of the stuff that I'm going to share here in terms of actually conducting the interview. But I'll go through a couple of the big areas that you want to hit on. So first thing, warm up. You get on with your participants, and in those first 5 minutes, very similar to any other type of user interview that you've done, but maybe just a little bit less focused, let's say. Important things in those first 5 minutes is really to just make your participant feel comfortable. Introduce yourself, thank them for their time, and set the tone as open. This is to check in with you. This isn't a fixed agenda. We're not looking to ask you specific things about our products. We really just want to hear how it's going with you as a personal trainer or as a user of our app. You can set some expectations. You might ask some follow-ups, but the point is a check-in, not a checklist of questions or topics to talk about. And you want to just set the expectations of how it will be used. We're recording this and we'll share it just with our internal team or a quick summary or recap with our team. Now, one thing I want to note about the warm-up aspect in those first 5 minutes is, especially if you feel nervous about this, keep in mind that on the other side, from a user or a customer perspective, it's usually really refreshing when there's a real person, us as researchers, behind the product that they're using, who's taking 15 minutes to check in with them and see how they're doing, and without an agenda or without a product to test or anything like that. That's really a nice experience. And when I've done these, even more so than more traditional interviews, people really like that and are, I would say, pleasantly surprised by that. So if you do feel any kind of nerves or just those first couple minutes of meeting a stranger on Zoom and being tasked with facilitating the interview, remember that they're probably pleasantly surprised that you're checking in with them without a real agenda, just hear how things are going and lean into that as you're setting up the tone and getting to know them a little bit early on. Okay, next thing, some context questions. After you get warmed up, a few easy questions to get some useful background, to ask about the participant. These are meant to understand who you're talking to, what their current situation looks like. I would call these like, how's it going questions, right? The guide that I shared with you in Lyssna has a lot more of these in there and some good examples that you can use to spin up a couple of your own. But for our example here, how are things going? How long have you been a personal trainer? Tell me a little bit about your clients. Do you have a lot of long-term clients, new people? What does a typical week look like? Notice none of these are about how they're using reps. None of these are, hey, how great is that new text message reminder feedback or feature that we created, right? This is all about just getting a little background on them and getting to know them a little bit better and letting them talk. Now, I highlighted these ones specifically because this is where a lot of the rest of the interview is going to flow from. I'll go through some of the other questions that you can ask in our question bank, but most of the time you're going to hook on to one of the things that they say, maybe ask a follow-up question or, oh, that's cool. Tell me a little bit more about that. And that will set the tone for the rest of the conversation, which is a good thing, right? So in terms of preparing your questions, have a good warm-up ready, practice it a little bit, have a couple of these context questions or background questions ready, and go from there. If you do need some more questions, like I said, most of the time your warm up and a few context questions will carry the conversation, but it can help to have a few other questions or just general topics ready. These are more kind of typical user interview questions: what behavior and pain points, reactions to things specific, aspects of your product. You want to use these, I'd say all of these pretty sparingly. You could add some forward-looking questions in. If you could change one thing about how you communicate with clients, if you could automatically, magically make one thing happen without you needing to do any work, if you could make something 5 times faster in your practice, how would you do that? Rely more on the context questions and having a conversation coming off of those, as opposed to having a big question bank with stuff like this in it. But can be helpful to get it down. You just want to make sure you're not going into user interview territory and checklist territory where you're trying to cover all those questions. Finally, wrap up, super simple, just what you would expect and what's typical of any interview, maybe ending with an open-ended invitation. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything we haven't covered? Anyone else we should talk to next? Maybe they can point you in the direction of some of their other trainers who might be open to 20 minutes every couple months. And of course, graciously thank them and confirm if there are any next steps or anything else, maybe a next conversation in a couple months, a follow-up or anything like that. So simple, right? And not drastically different than your typical interview process and a research guide or question guide that you would create for it. But main difference is focus on the warm up and those context questions, go from there, have some other stuff ready, but really try to break, if you have this habit of trying to get through all the questions, you really want to try to break that, have them there if you need them, but letting yourself just listen and continuing the conversation with the person. If you're used to doing research and interviews where you need to have clear findings and an output and a decision made on it and like all your questions answered, this can be a really hard thing to break, right? To just let yourself talk to the person without a goal or an insight to uncover or something like that. But that is where the good stuff comes from these continuous interviews, and you have to commit to that. I think one of the best ways is having just a really light guide and not relying on it too much, but having it there if you need it. Okay, let me get to our last part here of sharing it with your team. You recruit, you find the right people, you do your first weekly interview, you ask some good context questions, you have a good conversation with, let's see, John, our personal trainer here. There's still one final step, which is to share that and to make it stick. If there's no realistic, key part, lightweight system for sharing, the initiative stalls out. You could run great continuous interviews consistently, frequently, ask all the right questions, have great conversations. If those are videos and transcripts that are dying in a Google Drive folder or even just on Lyssna, where it's just a bunch of recordings, they're not going to go anywhere. And that practice will stall out because it's invisible. So when you're sharing what comes out of your interviews, you don't want to treat this like typical interview synthesis or like a more focused, in-depth interview synthesis. With interviews like that, when you're synthesizing, you're analyzing themes, you're seeing frequency between participants, you're comparing what feedback people had around certain areas. And it's easier to do that because in those interviews, you're generally asking the same questions or asking about a specific area. So when you're synthesizing, you can find how this group feels about this feature that you asked about, or how this persona, what they're frustrated with versus another persona. You're comparing apples to apples more because those interviews are more structured and focused. With continuous interviews, you can't really treat them like that, and it doesn't really make sense to. There's no real data set to formally compare since these sessions could go in all different directions. You're not asking about the exact same things. You're not diving into specific parts of their personal training process or the same parts with each trainer. You're having a conversation and following their lead about what they want to talk about. So for that reason, when you're sharing your takeaways from these continuous interviews, it's more of a summary, not synthesis. You're just sharing kind of what happened. Some key things to keep in mind for sharing these with your team. First one is keeping it brief, right? You want to come up with a format like this one I have right here. And this is very similar to what I use for Lyssna and what a lot of our teammates use. You want something that is brief, it's easy to scan, right? If this is going in a Slack channel or this is going somewhere for your team to see that's visible, you want it to be easy to digest, right? You certainly don't want to just paste a whole transcript in there, and you don't want to give a PhD level analysis of everything that happened in it. Brief, honest, and true to the conversation. The reason I mention that is because sometimes, at least I've felt the need to pull an insight out of it or to say, oh, this was one important thing, but sometimes those don't come out of it, right? And if that's the case, you want to share that honestly and just relay exactly what happened. You're not going to have a groundbreaking insight in every one of these. You don't need that, and you don't need to feel pressure to like over extrapolate or have a clear action item coming out of it. Keep it honest, keep it accurate to the conversation, keep it brief, share the big stuff, and make sure that it's visible. Make sure that this is showing up somewhere where the people who need to see it can see it. We use Slack channels for this and a pretty similar format for it, like the one you're seeing here. And that's effective. Doesn't need to be like that, but as a good example of quick, honest, easy to scan, easy to find, and a good representation of the conversation, that something like this works. Okay, where it lives, like I said, Lyssna, they're all going to be here in Lyssna. So you'll have if you're doing them in Lyssna, you're going to have your recordings, your sessions, your transcripts, your one hub for everything. We do it in a Slack channel, as I shared with you. Now you could put these in a more structured repository, right? If you want to, I don't know, if you have a project management system or a CMS or a Notion database that you're using for them, that's okay. As long as it's visible, as long as they're brief and accurate, all the stuff I stated in the last slide, that's fine to organize them that way. The one thing that I would caution you with on that is getting too granular with tagging them, filing them, adding a lot of fields to each one of them, like over optimizing or over organizing or cataloging these to reference. That's not a bad thing in itself, but I have seen where that practice and even just the little work that it takes to like neatly tag, categorize, structure those, put them in a database, where that can start to make it harder to do these consistently. With the sharing, with everything else, you really want it to be quick, easy, and effective. So any steps that you can eliminate that are getting in the way of that or creating friction between starting this practice and sharing the results of, or sharing the summaries of your interviews, lean towards those because consistency is number one here. All right, guys, if you have some questions, drop them in the chat. I know we're at time now. I'm going to wrap up with some key takeaways. I've got a discount code for you guys as well that I'll share in the chat and a feedback survey. So let me just copy and paste those. But in the meantime, if you got any questions, drop them off in the chat and I'll take a look. To wrap up, I know we covered a lot in this hour, so let me give you the main things to remember on kind of each part of the process. First thing, you don't need a research background to do this well. If you're doing the stuff that we covered here today, you've got a tool like Lyssna that's going to make the recruitment process, streamlining the logistics of it. If you have something that's going to really make that easier. If you have a good framework for the type of questions that you want to ask, if you've got a pool of users or if you're recruiting users and you've got people who are on board to do this and see the value of at least starting it, even in a small scale, you can do this. You don't need a research background to do this well, as long as you're consistent with how you're running these. Next takeaway, don't over target who you talk to. The article that I shared with you by Diane has some really good, more specific stuff on this. You want to make sure you're not talking to the same people over and over again. You want to make sure that you're segmenting people by, let's say in our example here, trainers versus clients. So there's certainly some level of segmentation you want to do and some thought behind who you want to talk to, but don't get too detailed persona level with this. Again, consistency is the most important. If you're struggling to recruit some really specific persona, then that's probably a good sign that you can loosen up on that a little bit and talk to someone who's close enough, right? Or one of your users as a means of prioritizing consistency over highly focused, detailed studies. In terms of questions, ask about their world before you ask about your product. Those context questions, those background questions, the how's it going questions at the beginning, use those as your starting point. I can tell you from experience, in most cases, you're not going to be digging for more questions or topics to ask in a 15 to 20 minute session. And that's a good thing. Keep it focused on them and their experience. Resist the urge, if you have it, to talk about your product or get feedback about your product. If it comes up, go down that road. But if not, listen, follow up with them, and use it as an opportunity to get a better understanding of them as a person, not just a user of your product. As we just talked about, summaries should be quick, accurate, and visible. This is like the last link in the chain to connect everything, right? You can do everything well up until this point, but if you're just dropping a transcript somewhere or filling out some really long summary or synthesis doc and putting it somewhere where people can't see it, it's not going to go anywhere. That institutional knowledge, that finger on the pulse that people have at Lyssna through sharing things on Slack, they're not going to absorb the summaries and the takeaways here. And ultimately, they're not really going to be getting the most use or having the outcomes that you would desire. And Joe, I will get to your question, but finally, my last takeaway, consistency beats intensity. And I would say consistency over everything when it comes to these continuous interview practice. If it takes a lot of time to put them in a neat Notion database, don't do it. Find a quicker way to do it. If it's taking you a while to type up summaries, create a Claude skill that you can drop the chat transcript or the video transcript in, give it a format, use that, run it through in 10 seconds and get a good summary of what happened in the conversation. If you have a big question list and your interviews are going on for 45 minutes or an hour, like way over, and it's making them more time intensive and more effort and more time away from other things you need to be working on, cut that down, right? In most cases, these are really lighter than you think. They're the things we mentioned you want to have in place, but consistency above everything. It doesn't matter how categorized they are, doesn't matter how thorough your summaries are, doesn't matter how well you recruit if the practice falls off and you're no longer bringing current, updated, consistent feedback from these conversations to your team. This is something that, a lot of times at the end of these workshops, I say, if you're redesigning your navigation, you can get started on the card sorting stuff we talked about here. You have to have a specific thing that you're working on. For continuous interviews, you don't. This is something you really can just start coming right out of this workshop. So hopefully you're feeling more equipped to do it. And with the guide and the template that I send out, got a really good starting point to adapt that to your own. Cool. Let me just answer. Thank you, everybody. I'll wrap up here, but Joe, I will answer your question about moderated or unmoderated. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Hope this was a useful session for you. Check out interviews on Lyssna, use that code, and keep an eye out for the follow-up email. You'll be getting it in about a half hour or so. It'll have the recording, resources, that guide that I sent you from Diane, as well as the Notion template. So you've got a great starter pack just in that email to start thinking about this and how you might get it off the ground, get your first session off the ground in your own day-to-day work. Awesome. Thank you guys. If you have to roll, I know I've kept you a little bit longer. Have a good one. Joe, can you do these as unmoderated and recorded? No, I don't think I would not do these as unmoderated. I think you could get some of the benefits out of it, and it's certainly something you can do on Lyssna with a prompt and asking people or giving a couple questions and asking people to respond on video or audio rather than filling out a survey. There are also totally unmoderated check-in type surveys that are along these lines. But for what we're talking about specifically here with continuous interviews and the conversations around it, there's not really a way to get the same benefits out of it by doing it unmoderated. Just by nature, unmoderated is going to have a direction that or a topic that a focus area you're asking people to talk about, even if they can go into different directions in how they share their experience on it. You lack the ability to ask a follow-up question, to go down a certain path, to get more context about something that you don't understand or you'd like them to clarify about their day-to-day work. So you can get some stuff out of kind of an unmoderated version of this, but you'd really be missing the reason why you do it, like the main benefits of why you do this in the first place, which is that face-to-face, quick, informal conversation and communication that can lead really anywhere, and that you're not driving towards a specific area of their work or a specific part of your experience. For specifically what we're talking about here, you want it to be live and face-to-face or on video to really get the most out of it. Cool. Thank you guys. Have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you on another workshop soon. All right. Take it easy, everybody. See you.